All right, we're live. Welcome to Dive into World Building. I'm Juliet Wade, and today we have a special guest. This is Carrie Cuinn, and that's spelled Q, not Q. See, this is what you think it starts with, right? It starts with C,
Right.
Cuinn. Great to have you with us here, Carrie.
Don't feel bad. Everyone gets it wrong. I mean, like my bank, doctors, everybody, they always ask me if I'm spelling it wrong, or they'll just flat out say, "Oh, we have a typo. Hold on, I'll fix it."
And then you're like, no, that's actually my name.
It could be worse. I googled Carrie Cuinn last time. Turns out that's someone who writes different things.
That does sound like someone who would write different things. I'm kind of curious.
Anyway, so when I spoke with Carrie about appearing on the show, she proposed this really terrific topic, which is world building without visual imagination. And Carrie, maybe you could take this opportunity to tell us a little bit why you proposed that topic.
Okay. The reason that I wanted to talk about world building without having a visual imagination, and by that I mean on the part of the person who's doing the writing, not necessarily on the part of the person who's reading it, is that I don't. So you know how everyone is a little bit quirky and different than everyone else, and there are a lot of names for the ways in which we are quirky and different from everyone else. I apparently have a condition called aphantasia, which basically means that I don't see anything in my head when I close my eyes. I do a little tiny bit, and we can talk about that more as we go on, but it's just the way that it's been my whole life. So I didn't actually think that that was weird until I got a lot older and found out that not everyone else had a brain that worked that way. And
there have
so
been a couple of articles about it recently.
Yeah, there's actually a study at the University of Exeter, and I'm actually a part of that. So, yeah, basically they just send me a lot of surveys, and I fill them out, and we go from there. But they're finding it's like everything else. They're finding out that once you put a name to something, it turns out to be more common than you usually think that it is. So everyone's visual imagination is on a spectrum. So there are people who have incredibly vivid visual imaginations and people who have barely any at all or really none at all. And I'm just happen to be on that end of the spectrum with people who don't really say anything. And so because of that, all of my writing, all of my reading, all of my interaction, with consuming fiction, anything that I don't see right in front of me, has all been about the meaning of it necessarily more than the way that it looks. And so as we go on, we'll talk about how I write if I don't really picture anything, which is actually a lot easier than it sounds. So.
Sure, I'm sure that people are curious. So, so what you were telling me was that it's clear that you write a lot. But it's also clear that you use semiotics, and that's semiotics is about meaning. So
right, most people will have heard of semiotics through Dan Brown, and I'm sorry if that's where you heard of it. Although Dan Brown would have said
no one has ever apologized to me for that before.
I'm not apologizing on the behalf of Dan Brown, but I'm just saying if that's where you got the idea of semiotics from, that's not really all that accurate. So there's actually a subset of semiotics that's called semiology. There's one particular guy who calls it that, and just like every other sort of school of philosophy, there's a subset. Great, we don't have to worry about that.
Correctly nested.
If you want to look up semiotics, and I've posted about this on my website, but my favorite person to talk about semiotics is Umberto Eco. A lot of people know him for writing fiction, but he was actually a professor, and he studied and wrote about semiotics for decades. What semiotics basically is the language of iconography. It's a language of pictures and images and the meaning of how you put visual things together. And so you might think, okay, well, what does semiotics have to do with not having a visual imagination? Okay, in my head, they're the same thing. And that's going to sound a little weird until we sort of explain it more. But semiotics is the thing that tells you that if you look at a Renaissance painting and there's a little dog in the bottom of it, that painting probably has something to do with loyalty, because little dogs meant loyalty. It's a thing that tells you if somebody's wearing a red hat that says "Make America Great Again," they're probably having something to do with Trump. It's the idea that an image, or the way that words are put in with colors, or the way that an image is how an image is presented, all have a meaning more than whatever the words or the face value of that thing is.
So
sure.
What you're talking about, I think, is the sort of symbolic
Right.
significance of particular images.
Yes, but it's actually more than that. So, for example, if you look at a statue of the Virgin Mary, in America, statues of the Virgin Mary tend to be a woman who looks fairly young with brown hair, blue robes, hands in front of herself, and she's sort of standing there very serenely. Mm-hmm. If you see that kind of statue, you go, oh, that's Catholic, that's the Virgin Mary, that's what that means. Mm-hmm. That's not a picture of the actual woman it's meant to represent. It's an icon. She's been elevated to this archetype kind of status. The way that you understand what that image means, like all the different layers of it, actually can be applied to every single thing that you see. So semiotics is about exploring not just the big cultural images or the religious icons, but what kind of ceramics is sitting on someone's table, what kind of clothes someone is wearing, you know, how they wear their hat, if they have a bandana in their back pocket, it all has meaning.
Uh-huh. Well, I would agree with you that clothes have meaning, right?
Sure, right.
Because a lot of that meaning is culturally constructed.
Well, semiotics is entirely cultural, and that's a really important thing to remember, because that goes back to the whole world building thing. And, you know, I think we're going to bring up a couple topics and then sort of circle back around to how they get there. Is wearing this outfit and they're sitting in this place and they're eating this food, but it also has this entire subtext that you may or may not get if you're actually part of the culture or not.
So are we talking about like when an anime obsessed 13-year-old is like, well, she's going to wear a kimono to school and has no idea what that means when they're writing something?
Well, sure, that's part of it. Yes, yes and no. So it depends entirely on, you know, is this supposed to be the real world or not?
Okay, sorry.
But it's also, you have to take into consideration. So if you're talking about, is a real 13-year-old going to wear a kimono to school? Sure. Where is she? Is there a reason she's doing it, or is this a daily dress? Is this because they're dressing up at school? Are they having a party? Or does the author think this is what 13-year-old girls in, say, Japan wear every day to school? Okay, sure, what year is it? So all of those things kind of matter. If we're talking about now, probably not. It's probably going to be school uniforms.
Yeah.
If we're talking about 50 years ago, maybe not a lot of women actually went to school. So, you know, there's a sweet spot in between you're trying to find. So yeah,
I also think I would also remark that when you're dealing with secondary worlds, you're actually looking at a sort of, I don't know what you call it, a dialogue or a dialectic between the world that you're creating and the semiotics that a person knows in our own world, right?
Right, absolutely. And
the question, of course, is this of whether you're going to construct a separate sort of semiotics for the secondary world, and how that's going to kind of interact with what people already know.
Right, and you have to be sure to explain it in a way that makes sense. So, you know, you've all read those authors that do like the info dump, where they go, okay, they're wearing this person, and here's 8 paragraphs about what that means. Okay, they're wearing this other thing, and there's 9 more paragraphs about what that means. You can certainly do it that way, but I personally don't like it. I prefer stuff to come up in context. They're wearing an outfit, they go to a place and someone remarks, oh, I can't believe you wore that today. That's yesterday's outfit. Oh, okay, so now you know she's wearing something that isn't right, you know, rather than a whole bunch of explanation.
Right.
But yes, so when you're doing secondary world building, you have to think about 2 things when it comes to semiotics. The semiotics of the people within the story, how they're going to react to the things they see in their culture, and then how a reader's going to react to that. So it's not just the reader that is you or your family, but you also have to think about readers everywhere. I mean, and that's true of any story that you write. And that's why we get into that conversation sometimes about, oh, well, is this appropriate for you to write? Is this something that you need to get a sensitivity reader to look over for you? You know, it's not because there are things that people are, quote unquote, allowed to write or not allowed to write, but you're not going to do a good job if you don't know what you're talking about. So you know, if you're trying to write about a culture that you're not a part of, that you've never been to, that you're just maybe reading a book about, you're going to miss so much. And then other people might read it and get offended, and it's not because you weren't allowed to write about it, it was because you don't know what you're talking about. So, it's really important. If you're going to write about something beyond yourself, by all means, absolutely do that. But also make sure that you're saying what it is you're actually trying to say when you dress people, when you move people a certain way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So because we were talking about the whole visual imagination thing and what I actually see, a couple of years ago, I figured out this is a really good way to explain it. So if you close your eyes and you picture an orange traffic cone, most people, when you close your eyes, you can literally see that in your head. I did not know that was how this worked. But you literally actually see a picture of a traffic cone in your head. When you open your eyes and try to picture the same traffic cone, you don't actually see it, but you still know all the same things. You know the shape of it, you know the color of it, you know which direction it would throw a shadow if the sun was in the air. Like, you still have all the same information, you're just not using your eyeballs. That's how my brain sees things. So I know things. I just don't literally see it. And so that's why things like semiotics, I got into it when I was studying history of art. My original major was history of art major. I have degrees in that. And I got into semiotics when somebody was explaining it. Well, this is what semiotics is. And I went doing that forever. Because to me, that was just putting information together and interpreting things like that was how my brain was already working. Because I don't see things, I know things about what it is I saw. And so to organize it, I can go, oh, okay, well, that was there because it was for this reason, it had this meaning. Okay, and then that's sort of just how it sits in my head. And so it was pretty natural to start interpreting things based on that information because it was how I was already seeing things.
Interesting.
That makes sense.
Do you guys have questions?
Yeah, how much world building do you do in terms of creating symbols in that context? And how do you go about it, I guess?
Well, for when I write, it's actually kind of interesting. So one of the things that I recently sort of noticed, I sort of took for granted the way that this is how my brain worked for a long time. So it wasn't until the last few years that I sort of tried to figure it out more. So I really didn't realize it was all that different from anybody else. So one of the problems that I've had with my writing is I very rarely describe people because I don't see people in my head. And so I've had people come back later and say, well, let me give you an example. I wrote a story that was bought and published, and that during the editing process, the editor came to me and said, I think this story might be a little offensive because you've got this story that's set in Mexico with people speaking Spanish, and everyone in the story is Latino, except for your main character, who's a white man. And I went, what? No, she's not. Not only is she a woman, she's also Latino, she's got dark hair, she's speaking Spanish, people are hitting on her. Oh, but I didn't describe her very well, so therefore she must be a white man. Because everyone you don't describe is a white man.
Yeah.
Okay. So I had to go back,
I see.
right, so I had to go back and put in some more description to make that more clear. But I hadn't thought to describe her because I figured I'd sort of describe the space around her. I knew who she was. I wrote her as that person. I wrote the story with her reacting to things the way that she would, and it hadn't occurred to me that someone would just assume she was white male because I hadn't specified.
That default is very strong, and I mean, it varies, but it can be very strong.
Right. So recently I've made more of an effort to describe characters, but if you look at my earlier work, I won't describe people at all. It'll just be a person walking through the scene. Or I'll describe something they're wearing or something they're doing, and to me that describes them as a person in a way that maybe not everybody else would think of it that way.
Well, I mean, I think to some degree, if you have a very close internalized point of view, that removes you a little bit from a visual sense of what the person's like.
Right. In that particular story, it was first person. So it was all her talking about, she was I doing this and I doing that. But the point remains that just because I thought of her a certain way, the reader didn't. And I could have left it with that default of, okay, it's a white male, but I didn't want to. So I changed it, and I've been making more of an effort to do that. Because I very rarely write from that perspective. So I think, I want to specify if this is a wet guy, I think I should let you know. But I find that too is that I have always written where if someone's race was important, like if I said, oh, this person is has dark skin, then I also point out everyone who has light skin as well. Because either none of it matters or it all matters. So that's just how I write. When I write in terms of creating, like I read a lot of science fiction, a little bit of fantasy, but mostly science fiction. And I do write worlds that are not our current Earth or not set on Earth. And so the objects that they're using, the things that they're wearing, become very important in terms of setting the stage for that. So I do two things. Kind of going back to that, how do you do world building? I do create semiotics, that language of visual cues for that specific world. But then I also try to make sure that if they're not the same as what the reader is expecting, that I explain that. Sometimes I've had people say, oh, I didn't get that at all. And then I go, okay, sorry. I think semiotics is important, but I also think at the same time that it's an extra layer. It's not necessarily the first layer. I know writers who I like, who I enjoy, where every single thing that they say has a meaning and has this extra meaning, and you need to know what it is to understand the story. I don't write like that. For me, the semiotics is an extra layer. So, for example, I teach workshops online sometimes. I'm doing one right now about microfiction. One of the women in my class wrote a very short story, like a Twitter-length short story, and it's great. One of the things she mentioned is she's looking at dinner forks from the outside to the inside, and it's fish meat salad. Now, some of the people read it and went, okay, hey, great. Some of the people read it and went, wait, is that actually how that works? And they actually went and looked it up and said, oh, this is really how salad forks work. So for them, there was this extra layer of meaning because they understood that this is actually how salad forks work and that this character is in a place where the position of the salad forks would matter.
Yeah.
And so some people read the story and they didn't know that. They didn't need to know it. The story still made sense to them. But the people who read it and got that extra layer, it meant more to them. And that's how I like to do my own fiction. I don't want you to have to know everything to understand the story, but if you get it, then great. But that also means that sometimes I write stories, and I had a story that was published recently where, it's a science fiction story, and at the end there's this weird owl the main character sort of stumbles upon. And I don't want to give the story away, but it's just this weird owl. It shows at the end. It doesn't look like a proper owl. Well, it's actually not. It's this thing that I've been wanting to write into a story forever. So ages ago, thousands of years, whatever, when the Catholic Church sort of expanded, one of the things they did was take little gods and little demons from various places and turn them all into demons. So there's this demon called Stolas, which is Greek, which is basically an owl with a crown on its head and really, really long legs, like an owl with stork legs. And it's the god of like science and astronomy. And that perfectly fit with the science that she was doing in the story that got her to the place where she found the weird owl.
Yeah.
And so I was like, yay, I put that in. And I figured, it doesn't matter for the story. You could read the story and the story is fine on its own. But if you happen to know that that particular owl is this weird little demon, then great. You have extra information. No one's figured it out.
Yes.
But that's okay because
now they'll hear this and they'll all go back and they'll be like, oh, mind blown.
If people watch it.
Extra bonus. It's like, but I mean, in a lot of ways, it's like Easter eggs, right?
Right. Yes, if you think of it that way, there are Easter eggs in everything I've ever written. And it's okay if you don't find them. But if you do, then I hope that it means something extra to you. It meant something to me when I wrote it. So.
Well, I mean, I think it's really interesting that you have this conscious awareness of this as a tool. But it is true that, so for example, I'm a linguistics person, right? And a discourse analyst, and a discourse analysis person. But my point here is that a lot of what we do with language, we don't do consciously.
Right.
And so when I'm writing and I'm in the moment and I'm writing something, I'm not really analyzing it for its discourse content. But when I'm revising, I'm going back and looking at the discourse content and I'm saying, okay, how can I tune this so it better expresses this or that or the other that I've learned, you know, the significance that I've learned from my linguistics study, right?
Right.
But I don't intend people who read it to go through and have had that linguistics study. I'm just expecting them to go through with their subconscious tools and say, I get what's going on socially on a gut level because of the cues that are in here, even though I don't recognize them consciously. So I think a lot of what we understand is subconscious. And so even though people might not, you know, yes, the funny owl is a deliberate reference to a particular myth, right? Or a particular special significance. But there's going to be a lot in there that where we know the semiotics, but we don't know we know the semiotics, as it were.
Right, and that's true for most people. For me, it's a little bit different, I think, because of the way that I see things. When I write or when I look at a scene, watch a movie, everything like that, to me, that's like two people are speaking at the same time almost. Like it's the language that people are saying and the language that's happening are both things that I'm aware of and are in my head at the same time. So when I write from that perspective of I'm sort of funneling both of those languages together when I write. But I don't have an expectation that other people are going to read that way.
Mm-hmm.
I think it makes me a better editor. So I haven't said, if you guys don't know, I work as a freelance editor. One of the things that I do when I read, you know, other people's work is I tell them, by the way, this translates to this and this translates to this, and you have the scene where she's wearing this color, and then later that turns out to be something that only royalty's wearing, but you don't mention it. Is that foreshadowing? Was that a mistake? Do you mean for her to be wearing that color? Like, these are how this is going to necessarily come off the page in terms of another layer of meaning. And is that what you were trying to say? And for a lot of people, sometimes people don't realize it. Sometimes they did it on purpose and it was perfect, and sometimes they did and they were trying to say something else, and so we can sort of figure that out and get to what you're actually trying to say. But yeah, just for me, I kind of see it all at the same time.
Yep, this is cool stuff. Definitely.
Hello, my brain is weird. Would you like to hear about it?
Yes.
I mean, I think so. I tend to talk about my specialties in linguistics a lot, and you know, the consciousness that I've developed through education, right? And it's a different kind of source for this kind of insight, but at the same time, I think it's really valuable to bring people's awareness to it because these tools are there, right? And it's like you have a superpower that that allows you to articulate with them more directly. And so there's great value not only in doing that, but also in bringing other people's attention to it. So,
well, it's interesting too because, you know, you can look at, so say you look at a painting, and if it's a painting that's from a culture that you're vaguely familiar with, so we're all in America, so an American painting or a European painting from, you know, I talk about like the Renaissance and the Northern Renaissance a lot. Northern Renaissance is my favorite because not only are there symbols, every single thing is a symbol, but I actually just like the art style.
mm-hmm.
But so things that, you know, you might have seen, you know, in a high school class, somebody might have said, oh, here's this painting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the very famous painting of Liberty from France, for right after the end of the Revolution, and there's the woman, and there's, you know, the little kid, and there's a whole crowd behind her, and she's got this dress on. Every single bit of that is exactly what it looks like. People are rushing forward and they're happy for freedom. And every single bit of that is something else also. So, you know, the clothes that they're wearing, the fact that there are children, the fact that, you know, Liberty's clothes are coming off, the colors that she's wearing, you know, all of that has another meaning. The people at the time who saw the painting knew exactly what it meant.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if it's modern enough that they would have written about it, that critics at the time saw it and wrote about it, we're pretty good that we know what it means. So what happens when we don't? In studying art history, there's a period of time that we like to call old dead white guy art history. So what happened was in the 17th, 18th century and into the 19th century, a bunch of British and Germans in particular. I don't, they were really into it. And then later, some Americans went out and quote unquote discovered the world. Oh, good for them.
Mm-hmm.
And they dug it up and they brought it home and they showed it to their friends and they said, look, isn't this pretty? And they, um, my favorite example is Troy, the guy who discovered Troy again, dug up all the jewelry, put it on his wife. They threw dinner parties and said, look at all the stuff I found for my wife. Give me more money and I'll find stuff for your wives too. Which is how they funded Troy. Right. The way that they interpreted Troy or Egypt or Native American artifacts or Stonehenge or anything else that we don't have, that we didn't at the time have like an English written, explanation for, they're wrong. And it turned out they were really, really, really wrong. The people who initially dug up like the great ruins of Egypt said, "Oh, how primitive." That was it. That was the reaction. Oh, that's nice. Oh, they got loot, and that was it. That was what they cared about. And it wasn't until later that people went back and went, "No, I think there's language here. I think there's actual history and stuff going on." Like they didn't get that at first because they weren't part of that world and they didn't want to be. So that's something that's important to keep in mind too. When you're creating a world that is a secondary world that is not based on Earth at all, you don't just have the culture that you're creating, you also have history. And the culture that you live in now is based on the history of what came before.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens if you have a fantasy secondary world and they go off on a great adventure and they go across the hills and across the valleys and fight some monsters and they find ruins? Great, what do the ruins mean? Chances are pretty good that even the characters in your story are not going to know immediately what what the ruins mean. They're not going to be able to say, "Oh, well, this way is the kitchen." Really? Have you been here before? You look at the way that people designed houses in 1900s in England, the way that they designed houses in the 1500s in England, the way that they designed houses in Rome. All of those houses are currently stacked on top of each other right now in England. Just down and buying all of those layers.
All the kings and rocks in England.
People are constantly like, "Oh, I dug up my basement and I found this great mosaic from the 2nd century. Oh, look, it was a bathhouse." Awesome. But yeah, so if you have characters that are doing any kind of exploration for things that came before then, you should probably have either someone who knows that stuff for a good reason, like they've been alive for 3,000 years, or your characters don't know. They have to find out. Like one time at World Fantasy last year, there was this great panel on food, and Fran Wild is on that panel. If you know Fran, she's awesome. Hi, Fran. And one of the things that we were talking about is the fact that getting food is not often enough a quest, but it really is, and it really should be, because so much of culture is based on the idea of, okay, we have this food, we need that food, now we have to make that trek and go meet those people and have a conversation and trade some stuff and get that food. And it is this whole epic journey. So when you find, so there's been a lot of things like people will dig up a ruin and they'll say, oh, we have these ruins and they're 80 miles from the sea, and yet, look, here are seashells. They must have deep, important, and symbolic meaning, because why else would they bring seashells 80 miles? Yeah, dude, they didn't. What happened was some traders who were at the shore sold some fish and some, mollusks and some other stuff to the people who lived 5 miles away, and those people sold some to the people who lived 20 miles away, and so on and so forth until they got to 80 miles inland, and somebody said, ooh, I like oysters. Oh, hey, these shells are pretty. I'll make something out of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all about like when you're in the culture, it all makes sense. When you're not, then you have to think about like how maybe it could make sense.
Okay, something I should bring up here in connection to the kind of exoticism people apply to ruins. Has anyone heard of the book Motel of Mysteries? I'm going to take that as a no. It's a picture book, and this was a good exercise we did in my 5th grade class. They read it to us, and it was about this ancient country of USA that had been buried under detritus from a catastrophe that happened 2,000 years ago. And they find these very symbolic and very exciting things. And then they didn't show us any of these pictures in 5th grade until we got to the end of the book and saw that the symbolic collar the guy had was a toilet seat that he was hanging around his neck, and this was all the USA that had been buried under junk mail.
Yeah, that's a really common story. I mean, not that I don't know that specific one, but you find that all the time. And that's because it's a great thing to make a story out of, because you're taking something that the reader knows the meaning of, but the characters in the story don't.
Yeah, I didn't mean to connect it that way. But so I'm proud of myself, even though I didn't mean to. But just the idea that we tend to assume, at least in this culture, that there's something deeper going on, whether it's food or not. It probably isn't. On the other hand, just a cool story. Take some of the archaeological training into, say, an 1800s remnants of a house, and you will find out where the kitchen is if they're familiar with the period. I've seen this with my mother. It's really cool.
Yeah, so one of the things that I did when I was in school is in Vinland, New Jersey, which is where Welch's grape juice is from, and conveniently very close to the Jersey Devil, Pine Barrens. They're doing an archaeological dig on some of the streets in Vinland, so it's just from like 100 years ago. So they had some houses that were torn down, and they let the University of Pennsylvania go in and dig up the backyards and do like an archaeological study on 100 years ago. And so that is really interesting, because you find out things like the kitchen wasn't attached to the house.
Mm.
The trash was buried in the backyard. So and they have they have these artifacts from this dig that go from 1850 to like 1950, and then you're trying to place like when was this made, when was that made, this is a piece of plastic, this is a piece of glass, and you're trying to figure all those things out. So you can apply archaeological practices to almost anything.
Oh yeah.
Do you guys watch Ancient Aliens?
No.
No.
Oh, come on. My favorite show.
You can not apply them too.
No, seriously, every time I watch that show, I yell at the screen.
That could be why I'm not watching it.
Well, it's probably why you're not watching it with me.
Well, that's true. But I would probably enjoy sitting with you and yelling at the screen with you.
That does sound fun. That admittedly does sound fun.
Right, yeah. My significant other makes me watch that show on a regular basis, and I'm pretty sure it's entirely because I yell at it. There have been times where I've actually paused the TV and went, no, hold on. And then I go and I get books, and I come back and I'm like, look, book! And then there's a whole thing, but yes, I will argue with the TV.
That sounds exciting to see.
The worst one is when they bring up the Popol Vuh, which is this ancient, South American god. And I love the Popol Vuh, and it's really great, and it's got great stories in it. And then they'll say, look, the Popol Vuh met ancient alien astronauts, and then I will it's fun. So, but the point is, that's a really great example of people putting their own interpretation on things that are really not connected at all.
Yeah.
So they will go and they'll look at a site and say, oh, this site is technologically advanced. There's no way these primitive brown people could have made it.
Mm-hmm.
I roll my eyes a lot, and then I yell at the screen. But that's all about, they're taking their current context and applying it to a situation where they don't have more direct information. Now, you have to imagine Ancient Aliens as a great example of sort of how we interpret everything. You may not realize it, but that's in fact actually how people interpret lots of things. So sometimes you will read a book by, for example, a white author who lives in Chicago who's writing a story set in southern India. Yep, Ancient Aliens, same exact thing. You can tell when you read it, if you know much about that culture, that they're just sort of slapping their interpretation onto something that was already there and going, oh, this is really close, we're going to use that. So you need to be careful of that, because the people who are actually in that culture know what all of those things mean.
Yeah.
When Ancient Aliens looks at South American ruins, I guarantee you that the people who built those buildings knew what they meant. My favorite part is when they wrote about what they meant, and then the Ancient Aliens people ignore that and talk about aliens. That's my favorite part.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why it all matters. There's context in everything. There's context in what people wear when they go to talk on the news when they're being interviewed.
Yeah.
There's context in how reality shows dress you. They're all trying to say something. When you watch a film noir, So a film from like a detective story from like the late 30s, early 40s. And a woman walks in wearing a tight-fitting dress and sensible shoes. She's the secretary. She walks in wearing a tight-fitting dress, not sensible shoes. She's the femme fatale of the story.
Mm.
She's the woman that's going to be dangerous. Now, not to say the secretary can't be dangerous too, but if you look at the shoes, you can tell the difference. Yeah, there are very few stories where the secretary actually matters in those, but those are my favorite. So yeah.
Mm.
So I'd like to bring up something before we go too far away from the subject of ancient aliens, which is rather odd. Can I, thank you, get you to bring this image that I'm going to link to up, Juliet, because it's an interesting story. I did catch part of an ancient aliens program, and what was really interesting to me wasn't that this guy thinks that aliens sculpted this mound to look like a Native American guy. It's how the Native American guys around there reacted. They were kind of using it to say, yeah, this is a powerful thing that relates to us. I can't remember all the details because it was years ago and I didn't take notes.
Is this the one that you're talking about?
Yes,
this
it
one
is.
Right here?
Yeah, that one.
Okay.
And
I'm not sure of the scale of it. Are we looking? Is this a like a satellite map?
Yeah, that line in the middle is a road.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So they're making their ancient alien claims, but what's interesting is how that's being used by people who have been disenfranchised so much, and they're claiming this ancient alien iconography or story and saying, hell yeah, we teamed up with the aliens. To kind of, and they're legitimizing that's within their own culture. I don't know, I'm probably saying all this wrong, but I think it's an interesting thing.
Well, I mean, so that goes into a whole other thing, which is sort of how you turn something into tourism to make it important. Because if something isn't a tourist site, it's probably not important. And that's a cultural thing that we find a lot in Western culture. If something is non-Western and we can't spend money to send people to look at it, then why do we care?
Yeah.
Which is an unfortunate truth. So if this group has been having trouble getting historical recognition for their site, or getting a hold of the property, that kind of thing, sometimes being able to say, hey, look, these guys said it was important, is the only way they can get the government to realize that it is.
Even if the guys are ancient alien guys.
Right, which is terrible.
It really is.
But if they manage to get around something by doing that, then hey, props to them. Take anything you can get at this point.
Yeah.
I understand that. Yeah, I just thought the narrative, the way they were using the narrative that came from these idiot white guys was interesting.
To be fair, not all of the ancient aliens guys are white guys.
Okay.
But
I'm sorry. The guy that was talking was.
Okay, but there's creative editing that they do. So they'll bring on somebody from like the University of Egypt who is an Egyptian guy to talk about Egyptian things, and they will say smart things about Egyptian artifacts, but they'll cut that with the idiot guy who has no idea what he's talking about, who wrote a book about ancient alien Egyptian style, and they'll intercut it to make it look like the smart guy from the university is supporting the ancient alien theory, when just in fact that's editing. So yeah, you gotta watch out for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's a discourse thing, and people, they want to make their thing look plausible, or who would watch it, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because there is this desire for people. People have this burning desire to believe that aliens exist and have done things, and what better way to make them feel that way than to play into their credulity and bring in discourse that's credible to kind of push the context over. So let's talk about do you have particular advice for writers who are listening to us and going, well, but where is the best place for me to enter into this kind of discussion in the world that I'm working with?
In what sense? And the answer is yes, I do, but in what sense?
Like, for example, a person who's listening to us talk about this, and they go, Well, but there's so much, and you know, how do I look at my story and get traction on understanding this and being able to, you know, because maybe they're feeling like, oh my gosh, now my story's all over the place. What do I do if I want to try to see the stuff that Carrie was talking about? How do I open my eyes specifically to the things that are in my work, but that I might not know are there?
Okay, absolutely. So in terms of just studying semiotics, I have a post that's going up on my website later on today, which is just my name, carriequinn.com. If you go there, I have a post a couple days ago that was the beginning of a sort of semiotics primer. Another one today is going up that's just going to be all links to things that you can read on the internet to look at semiotics. Because I didn't want to come to this hangout and be like, hey, you guys should know stuff, and then, you know, just Google it. I'm here for you. I will help you out. So there's two parts of that. The one thing to remember is that anytime that you are creating a fictional world, the rules are whatever you decide they are. Whatever you decide the meaning of someone's outfit or someone's food is, they are yours. As long as it's consistent, which is very important,
Mm-hmm.
they will still be yours, and they will make sense to people over time. They may not make sense the first minute that you introduce something, but when you introduce it again later and you show new context for that, they will start to go, oh, this means this thing in these contexts because they'll have seen it. So whatever your secondary world is, whatever you're writing, as long as it's consistent all the way through and you know what it means to you, other people will get that.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry so much. Now, here's the part you should worry about. Once you've made it consistent, that's one of the most important things you can do. The other thing you have to do is figure out why it means that way to you. When you're writing real world stuff, historical fiction, things that are set on our planet in a time that people are sort of used to, anywhere in the world that people could say, oh, I'm from there, or I read a book about that place, people are going to assign a meaning to the things that you say, so you should probably know what that meaning probably is. The way that you do that is you read books about a place, you go to a place, you live in a place, you talk to people who have lived in that place. If you write a story that has characters that are not you and is set in a place that you have not been to, that's fine. Personally, I don't have a problem with that. Just do a really good job. The way that you do a good job is you write the draft that you want to write to tell the story that you want to tell, and then you edit it. That's where this stuff gets fixed. Do not just put it out in the world after you wrote it and go, hey, I think it's great. It's probably not. You're all wonderful people and you're all wonderful writers, but no one's draft is awesome. My drafts are not awesome. Your drafts are not awesome. Do not show them to people for a reason. I mean the general public. So what happens is that if you write a story that you're not 100% comfortable with, find someone who is. Ask a friend to read it. If somebody reads it and they give you advice, listen to them. No one is giving you advice because they hate you. No one is giving you advice because they think you're a terrible person. They're giving you advice because even if they don't take it that way, whatever way, you know, that they're telling you they're taking something, they think someone will, and they want you to know so that you have a choice. You could write something that's offensive to people, and if that's what you want to say it. By all means, go out there, publish it. Be prepared for whatever backlash you're going to get, but own it. It's yours. The point of having a reader, the point of having an editor, the point of having a friend look at your work and give you an opinion is not because they're going to tell you that everything is terrible. They're going to tell you how things are coming across to them, so you have a choice of whether or not that's what you want to say. No one can know everything all the time. You know, I can write about what it's like to be a woman in America, but at the same time, I can write about what it's like to be a white woman in America who grew up at a specific time, in a specific place, and has lived in other specific areas, and how the world and I sort of interact. Everything beyond that, I have to guess.
Right.
You know, and
I mean, it's sort of everybody has this sort of ultimate cultural myopia that comes from their own environment, right?
Right, exactly.
So, I mean, that's not...
language.
And it's not something to be ashamed of either. It's it's just a fact. But if you want to be able to free yourself from some of the consequences of that, then you have to make sure to encounter different situations and keep in mind that what something means depends a lot on its context and is not going to mean the same thing in this context as it does in your personal context necessarily.
Right, you know, and the truth is that everything relies on context, and everyone's context is so different that you can even take language, English language, spoken in the early 21st century by two people who are Americans, who are, say, for example, both white women of a certain age, who have a certain kind of family, and I guarantee you we could have a conversation and not mean words the same way.
Right. And you know, I mean, that's one of the reasons why when you read like academic papers, they spend the first big piece of the academic paper going, here are the words that I'm going to use, and here's how I'm going to be defining them for this purposes of this paper.
Right,
You know?
and that's why there's, you know, when you do academic writing, which I've certainly done plenty of, there's a lot of self-referencing. You'll say, you know, based on this person's interpretation, we're going to say this, because you're setting that sort of, hi, this is the language I'm going to be using today. I wish everyone would do that. Hi, this is the language I'm going to be using today. Here are my flashcards. Let's have a conversation. People don't do that. It's a little frustrating for me, but but that's true. So imagine how much different, like, you know, it's like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Everyone is connected to Kevin Bacon. Some people are connected to Kevin Bacon by 1 degree, like you've met Kevin Bacon.
Yeah.
Other people are connected to Kevin Bacon by 6 degrees. You are the farthest away from Kevin Bacon you can be. You're all the way over there. So you have to picture that every person who's going to read your story is either 1 step away from you in terms of their cultural understanding, or 6 or 10 or however many other steps away from you. So you want your story to make sense to people who, no one can be you. No one can be 0 steps away from you. So everyone's automatically always 1. So you want your story to make sense to the people who are 1 step away from you. But you also want your story to basically make sense to the people who are 10 steps away from you, and if possible, not really, really offend them. And it's very, very easy to do. It's so easy to do, which is why...
Offending or not offending?
Offending people. And the reason why it's easy to do is not because other people are sensitive or any of that kind of garbage that people say. No, the reason that it's easy to offend people is that you don't know what you're saying. And it's so hard for people to accept that they don't know what they're really saying. So it's not that you're not using the words properly. It's not that you're not describing something properly. It's that everything that you create, everything that you write comes out of this context of what it means to you. If you care what other people think when they read it, then you have to care about what it's going to mean to them. And if it's the farther something is away from you, the more opportunity there is for misunderstanding. So the way that you kind of figure out like how to get a little closer to people is to read as widely as you can and to watch as widely as you can. Just by reading works in translation, like good quality translations, watching movies that are international movies. Movies not just set in South Africa, but actually created by people who are living in South Africa. Movies with subtitles are your best friend ever. The subtitles
just watch District 9.
What?
Also just watch District 9 regardless of South Africa because it's amazing sci-fi.
District 9 is a really, really interesting movie. We could have an entire conversation about District 9 and what that meant for apartheid and slavery and race relations and all of that. Something that I'm really loving right now, which is on Netflix, if you have it, is the first season of Clever Man. If you have not seen it, it's amazing. And part of the reason that it's amazing is that it's a story that on the surface completely makes sense to white people from America, but it's written in the context of Aboriginal people from Australia. And not just,
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, not just the supernatural Aboriginal people, the hairy men that are part of the Aboriginal mythology, but regular, you know, Abo kids living like downtown Australia that have to deal with the things they have to deal with, trying to be part of that culture but not being part of that culture.
Yeah, and by the way, that's a pretty bad word, so the ABBO word is a bad word. So
I was quoting the show.
No, I'm saying that for people who don't have it in the context of the show.
Right. Yeah.
Go around taking that word out of the current context of quoting the show.
Yes. So and that goes back to the cultural things.
That is good.
You can have a conversation about the show and the way that certain characters are describing themselves and seeing themselves in the context of the show. But if you go and randomly describe people as that, that's going to have a completely different meaning than saying these people are talking about themselves in that way.
Right.
So that's something else. Yes, exactly.
And so I'm also going to self-plug just slightly. I wrote an analog editorial, and it's online there, about context and language change and people getting offended and some various things like that. It's a very different perspective from Carrie's perspective, but you might still find it interesting.
I should probably not read that while we're doing this chat. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm like, ooh, semiotics, and so I started.
I also wanted to everybody who's participating got to look at the cute little stola. So I'm gonna screen share it in a second. So the video can see it. It's adorable.
Yeah, good demon god.
So, and he's a prince, and he knows things, and he's smart. Like, how cute is that?
I've drawn like 3 of them over the course, just from like your description. And I just sort of can't stop drawing this thing now, and I need to steal it and use it for something.
By all means, I just feel free.
Can't even. It's just it's too cute.
I think there's one in a game somewhere. But no, it's not a very popular character, but I just love him. I read about him in high school in like the Big Book of Demons, and I was like, he's a little owl, and he's a prince, and he knows about like astronomy and science. Yes. So yeah, I held on to him until I felt like I could stick him somewhere.
I'm like, this is ridiculous.
You know, those kind of things happen though. You'll run across an idea or a thing, and you'll be like, this will be in a story of mine someday.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, he lives on the beach, right where. So if you go to Greece, where the little beaches, right where the trees are. So like right where the trees and the beach meet, that's where he lives, and he'll hang out. And you can go hang out with him. Apparently.
Nice.
There's like casting and all that, but you know that came later. I'm pretty sure it's one of those things where somebody said, we have this great little god, and he lives over there, and we worship him, and he's smart. And somebody went, yep, demon.
Yeah, because they did it a lot.
Yeah.
They really did.
Yeah.
Well, and you know what? There's also the factor of how significance of symbols gets changed by, you know, a new religion moves into the area, and suddenly all the gods are the wives of your god, right?
Yes, that's always fun.
Like
yeah,
mythology and such. But you know what? We're hitting up on 11 o'clock now. Because we've had such a nice chat.
I mentioned that I could just talk about this. Like, we are so not even close to being done about talking about this, but that's only because we would.
But we'll never be done talking about this.
Yes, exactly. So, you know, just, I guess to wrap it up, I would just say that, here's a hint. Okay, yes, great. Here's something useful that I can say. So if you want to read over your work and you're not sure what people might take as symbols and what they don't, go through a copy of your manuscript and circle every single thing that might be remotely visual. Color of someone's clothes, something that they're eating. I know it sounds like a lot, but
she has a fashion theme going on. It's going to be terrifying.
Yeah, no, I have a whole novel about kids making fashions.
I actually...
Magic.
Yeah, they're going to fashion school, magical fashion school.
So Carrie's just handed you an enormous opportunity, Che. Seize the day.
Right? Oh my God! I have a word limit. It's a middle grade novel.
I'm not saying that you need to. I'm not saying that you need to like expand on any of those things.
Okay.
I'm just saying if you go through and you circle every time that the color blue is mentioned, or every time that somebody has a reaction to something visual, like so if someone walks in wearing a short skirt and someone reacts, then you go, okay, this is what that means to this person. You know, and you can go through your work and pull out all the visual things, and then you can go through your work and pull out all the sound things, or the taste things, the smell things, basically the things that are going to be sensory information. these are the things that will get translated as more than the words that you're using to describe them. Mm-hmm. Again, you might be perfectly happy with that description. You may not care. But if you do, and you were kind of wondering how other people are going to take it, if you go through your work and pull out all the things that could be semiotic, then you can ask yourself, am I using this consistently? Does this have a meaning that people will be able to infer from having read it? Mm-hmm. Does this have a meaning that I borrowed from someone else? Do I need to make sure the meaning's right? And then, then even if you don't know to begin with the answers to those questions, you'll at least know what you're supposed to be finding out.
Yeah, like for example, Che.
Yes.
No, I'm gonna pick an example. Remember the dress with the fish? Okay. I'm guessing that fish is not random, but it's a thing of significance to the person who made it and the person who's wearing it. But the significance of the fish might be different to a person who is seeing the person wear it, right? As opposed to the person who is wearing it. And that could be an interesting source of conflict, cultural difference, any number of things.
Shay, have you read The History of Costume?
No, I have not.
And there's a really great book on costuming, which is on my bookshelf, and so if I get up, you'll all see me walk away. And I'm trying to see if I can remember it off the top of my head and Google it. Barbara something, I think, is the person who wrote it, but essentially it's a history of clothes and sort of what clothes meant in Western society up until like the 14th century. So there
awesome.
there's a lot of academic studies of like what clothes mean. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, which you don't have to be, I happen to be, so that's how I know. There's tons of references that you can look to.
Awesome. So I think we're done for today. But what I am going to do, and what I typically do before we sign out, is I talk about what we're going to be doing next time, and I'm trying to get into my planning file so that I can remember what we said we were going to do next time, because you know how that goes. 2 seconds. Come on, load.
Load like the wind.
Load like the wind, except of course it loads slowly because I'm also doing a video chat at the same time.
Yeah.
Finally, yay. Okay, so I think we're gonna do invasive species next week.
Ooh.
Oh, wow.
That's a good one.
That's huge.
Yeah, everything's huge. You know, I think we're never gonna run out of topics, honestly.
Definitely not.
But I want to thank you, Carrie, for being here. This was such an instructive and enlightening conversation. Thank you for sharing your insights, and I'm going to stop the broadcast.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.